First of all, I'd just like to welcome everybody to this event and thank you very much for joining the launch of the 4th annual Worldview survey results. Previously, we've always had these events online, so it's great to actually be here in person. And I think we really want to be able to delve into some of the issues that will be raised here today with a very exciting and dynamic discussion with our panel. So whether or not you've been involved in the research of Worldview to date, we hope that you can leave today with an enhanced understanding of what the latest data is, what it's telling us, and how it actually might enhance your own work, whether that's in public engagement, in advocacy, in policy, or in communications or otherwise. This timing is that this is the 4th wave of Worldview, and later this year we will be doing the 5th wave, and we will then, I suppose, we are looking at the moment at what the next iteration of Worldview could be and would look like. And so I think it's really around, we'd like to open up the discussion later a little bit around those plans and what some opportunities might be in the kind of next 5-year period. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panel. We have Luke Reaper, who is the CEO at Ipsos BNA Ireland and has been involved with Worldview from the beginning. We also have David Hudson from the Development Engagement Lab and the head of the International Development at University of Birmingham, who's equally been a very important strategic partner for Worldview over the last number of years. Joining us via Zoom, we have Anada Karinabau, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is the Deputy Director of Public Opinion Research and Consultations at Global Affairs Canada and leads their own version of Worldview in Canada. And I know that Anda's colleagues from Global Affairs Canada are also joining, including Andrea and Bruxada. So we're delighted that you're here and able to join this discussion. And lastly, joining us for the panel discussion today is Barry Cannon, lecturer at the Centre for the Study of Politics at Maynooth University and the author of several pieces of research tied to far-right narratives here in Ireland. So with all that in mind, there's a lot to get through, but do think of your questions. We really want to give enough time to allow for kind of questions, discussion in our session today. So you're very welcome, and we really want to hear your contributions as well. But with that, I'll hand over to Luke, who will, I suppose, start by giving us a clear overview of some of the outcomes of Wave 4. Thank you, Luke.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll take you through a snapshot of the public findings in terms of the engagement study that we conducted. Obviously, there's a full deck with the findings on the portal and that. So please do go through it at your leisure. So I'll take you through some of the key findings here today. So just a couple of quick things to highlight. So a couple of things. It's a quantitative survey first off that I'll be presenting today. It's a very meaty sample of over 2,500 people we interview per wave. So very robust in terms of the data, fully representative of the population. And what that's important is, number one, I suppose, the accuracy of it, but also as well, it allows us to dig deeper and delve deeper into, I suppose, different cohorts of society, especially when we come on to the segmentation and that. And we conducted it, I suppose, online, and it was conducted over October, November of last year on that. In terms of the objectives of Worldview, just a couple of things to stress. First of all, it's broken into several different parts. The first part is a comprehensive desk research piece that's undertaken. And really that is to understand, I suppose, what research already exists, what data already exists on this particular subject matter in Ireland and also abroad, that can feed into and I suppose inform the design of the study to make this a really actionable piece of work in that. There's an audience segmentation piece, and that's important, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is important in a second. I think we use that to, I suppose, to segment the population, understand the, I suppose, the profiles of different people, different attitudes to overseas aid development and that, yeah. And also we can able to track that over time. And then we have an annual survey which tracks attitudes, people's attitudes live, I suppose, to development and cooperation, behavioural engagement, Irish attitudes just in general and that, and what's the drivers of support, and the levers basically to change, I suppose, attitudes and behaviour on that. And very often then we do a focus group part, which allows us to delve deeper into certain areas or topics to understand, I suppose, beliefs or motivations of the public regarding, I suppose, overseas aid development and that. We can assess communication styles, and channels as well in that, and how that vary according to different audiences or different segments in that. And then as well, it allows us to test out various ways of actually engaging with the various audiences as well, and that to I suppose allows us to communicate better with people in terms of this topic matter and that. And obviously we're in year 4 of the 5-year cycle on that. The first thing I want to talk a little bit about is the segments, yeah? Just talk a little bit about that. Why is creating a segmentation of the population important? All organizations, or literally the top organizations, would conduct segmentation research. And really it's a critical tool really to enable us to understand beyond, I suppose, simple demographics, our audiences in a much richer way. It allows us to, I suppose, effectively communicate better, allows us to tailor our communications. It allows us to look at different channels we want to communicate, how we communicate, and it allows us, I suppose, to customize, I suppose, our offerings that'll attract, I suppose, different segments of society differently in that, and I suppose, and ultimately generate, I suppose, a higher level of engagement and I suppose more positive support for us as we continue our work on that. And overall, it basically improves marketing effectiveness. It helps drive donations, and it gives us a competitive advantage overall on that. So what I want to talk a little bit about is just the segments, yeah. Now you can go into a lot of detail on these in terms of the overall deck and that, but just to talk a little bit about the dynamics of the segmentation. First of all, as you can see, higher up, the more segment is higher up on the chart, the more highly engaged they are with overseas aid development, and the lower down they are, the less highly engaged they are. And also the other dynamic is, I suppose, in terms of age, a little bit more younger in terms of the left-hand side as you're looking at it versus more older in terms of the right-hand side. And as you can see, what we have is we've 6 very core segments, and we've tracked these over time. Where we can profile these not only in terms of size of prize, but also in terms of their makeup, who they are, in terms of demographically, but also as well their attitudes to overseas aid development and that, yeah. And I suppose just to give you a little bit of a flavour, yeah, not surprisingly, we have a segment called Global Citizens, yeah. They're quite a meaty segment, over 500,000. They tend to be younger, they tend to be a little bit more middle class, they tend to be a little bit more urbanite, a little bit more Dublin, a little bit more single. And their attitudes to aid, it's driven really by humanitarianism, solidarity, and they see, I suppose, a lot of exploitation out there. And they're at the top of the pyramid. They're in, yeah. you know, they are the ones that donate. You know, you can probably reflect it around the audience here today, and in terms of our key donors and that, yeah. What is at the other end of the spectrum, and this is not surprising for any segmentation, you'll have one that are a bit more detached. We call them the disengaged, yeah. And look, you know, who are they? There's 500,000 of them, yeah, and they really are disengaged. You'll see them when we go through some of the data and that. They're really pretty unmoved, yeah, by, I suppose, helping developing countries in terms of need and that. They are pretty much, you know, they're hard to shift the dial. We would advise, I suppose, you know, probably not using and emphasizing trying to change their attitudes. Yeah, it's just too much, you know, hard work. You know, kind of too much effort in terms of that. They tend to be more male. They tend to be a little bit more midlife, a bit more blue collar and that. And emigration is a big concern for them. Yeah, so you can start to see, I suppose, you know, where their mindset might be and the competing, I suppose, areas in terms of their own lives and their perceptions of society in terms of that, yeah. But I suppose across the other segments then you get into different nuances, yeah. And I particularly am interested in the empathizers, yeah, in terms of that segment up, yeah. That's 1 million people in that particular segment. They are a little bit more female, again, younger, but also middle-aged, a little bit blue collar and outside. And they are waverers. And they represent a good proportion of our society that can be convinced, yeah. And it's almost, if you can see, to stereotypes, but this middle-aged man in a pub, convincing his peers, that actually, do you know what? We should be doing something here. We should be doing something about it. They are waivers. They can be convinced, and you'll see that as we go throughout the charts. So very interesting segments and that overall, and indeed are the pragmatists. And as you move up, you have the multilateralists and the community champions, which are obviously a little bit more bonded to what we do and that, But by doing the segmentation and to track these over time, it allows us to, I suppose, understand, their views, their attitudes, their behaviours, how we might tackle them, and who we might target, to change behaviour in the future of that. What is interesting over the course of the last couple of years is, I suppose, the pragmatists and the empathizers have actually grown, So, which is not surprising if you think about society in general. That so, you see a number of points shift. They've grown, whereas I suppose our higher level segments have dropped back slightly in that. Not radically, but we just see that shift, which is not surprising, I suppose, given the current discourse that's out there at the moment in that. But good to track over time and to understand how these things are developing. So talk a little bit about overseas development aid. So the importance, of government providing overseas aid and that. So you have 3 and 4, I suppose, of the population view ODA as important, overall, which is a very, very strong, I suppose, results overall. And you see the negativity only about 1 in 5 would be, don't see it as important in that, which is a very strong, I suppose, mandate overall and quite consistent over time. And we can see that that's not the same, and David will probably talk a little bit about that later on, but it's not the same in all countries and that, where other countries have a little bit more of a challenge in that. And here we can see the power of the segmentation. So when you look at the same question by the different segments, you can see obviously are disengaged with the red there. You can see why you wouldn't focus your energy on them. You can see why, I suppose, the global citizens, the community champions, the multilaterals are where they are in terms of that segmentation overall and that. But what is also interesting is the empathizers there. Over 1 million people, they're a little bit lower down, but they still think it's very, very important in terms of government providing overseas aid and that. So it's good to understand, I suppose, and delve much deeper here in terms of the various aspects across the segmentation of that. And then to what extent should the government spending be increased, remain the same, and that, in terms of the overall spending and that. You have about 29% of the population feel it should increase, you have about 42% think it will remain the same, and about 23% really think it should decrease and that overall. I suppose we need to keep a watchful eye on this, we do see that there is a little bit of an element of that decrease that have crept in over the last couple of years. But again, I suppose the overwhelming, majority is remain the same, or I suppose to keep see an increase on that. So in terms of the higher boxes and that. And to what extent the government should increase or decrease the amount of spending it should do. When we look at this, I suppose, by the different segments, I suppose the only segment that's showing an appetite for increased spending is around the community champions. And again, if you think about that particular segment, very much bonded in terms of the community and understanding, I suppose, relationships and that, it's not surprising. But even on this particular metric, which is interesting, one thing I would draw attention to is the empathizers and the pragmatists, and we see in terms of the red there, in terms, yes, they'll have lower levels in terms of the top 2 boxes in terms of increase, in terms of the level of increase they feel the government should provide and that, but it's just they have slipped over the last couple of years, and that is where the battleground is, we sort of have the top segments, but the battleground is for those people who are the waverers, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, and by understanding, I suppose, our segmentation, we're able to actually effectively target better into the future on that, and put together a convincing case of why we should be spending on that overall. Concern levels, around poverty in developing countries, What do we see? It's very strong levels. So still over about 70% of the population are concerned, overall, and very strong across the segments and that, even across the empathizers, the pragmatists, lower down segments. It's really only the disengaged that aren't concerned overall on that. And then when we look at, I suppose, to what extent people feel ODA can bring about positive change for those people living in developing countries, we see 3/4 of the population agree. And that's been very, very strong over all the waves of worldview and that, yeah. And it gets even stronger, not surprisingly, probably for a little bit more middle class and older, but really across the population, it has been consistently strong, and that, and a great mandate overall in that. Just to talk a little bit about people's perceptions, yeah, of the main causes of poverty in developing countries. And this has been quite consistent over the study in that. And we see, I suppose, the top three, it centers around, I suppose, government and private sector corruption in these countries. It centers around war and conflict, and it centers around, I suppose, inefficiency and incompetence in terms of governments in the area and that, so that's what people are focused in on. They probably don't understand the minutiae and get into the level of detail as you get further down. They latch onto those sort of ones, yeah, overall. And what is the change year on year? I suppose people are a little bit more focused on war and conflict, not surprisingly, given what's happening. And also a little bit more focused, albeit still at a lower level, and not enough investment by corporations who prefer to invest in more developed countries than that. So that's the key changes overall. But the top three have been very consistent over time and that, And the most important reasons then, so to understand a little bit more about the reasons to help those in developing countries and why people feel it's important to help people in those developed countries worse off than ourselves and that. And I quite consistently focuses on human rights. It focuses around this whole concept of shared humanity and indeed humanitarianism coming through. A little bit of an increase around empathy and justice coming through, I suppose, over the last couple of ways, but fairly consistent over the last number of years on that, despite the fact that human rights have dropped, I suppose, from the first wave of that. It's quite consistent. And then, I suppose, get a little bit more into, I suppose, the public in terms of actions they're taking in relation to go over poverty and development in the past 12 months. So what have people have done and that overall in that. So I suppose the interesting is we're seeing an upward curve in terms of engagement, yeah, in terms of reading, watching, listening to news articles, either online or offline. So that sort of engagement of information and that coming through and that's very, very high across the population. It just gets a little bit higher amongst older individuals and that. Discussing it with family and friends, and I suppose it depends if that level of, I suppose, engagement in terms of media and articles and that works. You can see why it would be discussed more in terms with friends and family and so forth and that. And that's quite interesting, especially amongst the younger populations, that discourse happening a lot more and that level of engagement and that coming through for them and that. And indeed as well, we're seeing an uplift, a gradual uplift in terms of sharing and forwarding articles, that information. So that shareability, which really gets that level of engagement and gets that word of mouth out there, comes through with that. And in particular, coming through for younger individuals as well, and by younger I mean under 35, and that, and even higher amongst the 18 to 24s, and that as well, and that. So more likely to discuss and share stories relating to global poverty and that. So again, some pointers there for us. And then other aspects, yeah, donating, yeah, so actual donating. Again, we saw an uplift, probably, I suppose, with conflicts that were happening a year ago, but that has maintained, yeah, that uplift overall, with 50% of the population making a donation in the past 12 months. We're also seeing volunteering, again, quite stable, and indeed becoming a member or liking or subscribing to a newspaper from a development or organization focusing on a particular issue and that, yeah. And the latter two, again, that activism a little bit more strong, I suppose, for more youthful parts of society and that overall. The other aspect of this as well is we want to track attitudes, yeah. Number one, I suppose, in terms of to what extent people believe, I suppose, ODA improves people's lives by providing access, yeah, to education, healthcare, clean water and sanitation and that. And that's been remarkably stable overall, with 3/4 of the population agreeing with that particular statement overall in that. As is, I suppose, that overseas aid increases, I suppose, economic growth. It it helps reduce social and economic inequalities as well coming through. And the other interesting thing as well is that there's an angle here which strengthens, I suppose, Ireland, and Ireland's political influence or our national security aspect in here as well in that. So people see different levels and layers to this, overall, quite tangible sort of layers, the goodwill sort of layers, but also as well as a nation in terms of how it impacts us as a nation and that. And if you dig deeper and you do qualitative work with that, that'll come through quite well and quite strongly with people in different cohorts. So what influences these attitudes, overall on that? I suppose we can't lose sight, and this is one of the nice things about Worldview is we look at and we ground the research in, I suppose people's everyday lives as well, and understands, I suppose, what is important for people out there and that, And we see the top 3 most important issues at the particular point in time of research. It's centered around, I suppose, certainly around homelessness, around housing, not surprisingly. Interesting enough, at the time, research household bills had sort of dropped back, albeit still right up there as an issue in that. But I suppose the key things that have moved up, was around, I suppose, not only the health service, but around immigration and homelessness, housing in general, and that, and immigration that actually doubled, and other work that we do in terms of polling, in terms of snapshot polling, and that it shows it is really obviously high on people's priorities at the moment, and taking a lot of mind share at the moment on that, So it's good to put things in context. It illustrates, I suppose, the size of challenge for us all. We can't rest on our laurels. We've got good attitudes towards what we do, but there's a lot of competing issues there for people in that, and which is only natural in terms of human nature. They look at things which directly and tangibly affect them on a day-to-day basis, and that's important to note that. Then other aspects, other issues of personal concern, when we present them with other lists and that, what are the key things that are, I suppose, of issues of personal concern, just generally in that. And we see war, conflict and terrorism really strong coming through, and actually has increased, over the last year, which is probably not surprising. We're seeing economic crisis, job cuts, we see climate change, and then we're seeing immigration. So immigration, war and conflict, they're the ones that have increased. Interesting enough, the whole economy aspect and climate change, they've moved back, a little bit down in terms of the radar, albeit still obviously in the top aspects overall of that. The other aspect, interesting dynamic here, and again, this comes through as in why important it is to track attitudes, over time. So because you can see, I suppose, things developing, and the sensitivity of the study, started to show us, I suppose, in December 21, there's a softening in attitudes, in terms of views of diversity and multiculturalism in Ireland. We saw that slippage occur even more in terms of last year as our year before, and then again last year we saw another drop, albeit a little bit more marked drop as well in that. So again, it allows us to track this over time and that, and we see the negativity comes through a lot more in terms of more blue collar classes, and with support, I suppose, a little bit more in terms of ABC1s and that. And then we can look at across segments, and this is where it gets even more interesting. You can look at what segments are driving, and the interesting thing here is all segments have dropped, on this. So it is something that's, in terms of this concern, is tapping across, I suppose, society overall, apart from global citizens, and what I suppose what we see as, I suppose, pragmatists and the empathizers in particular actually seeing that sort of drop more. A couple of other things coming through that we should keep an eye on from the study. It is around, I suppose, media and the channels we should be using. So what ones have the greatest influence on views and opinions on key issues and that? We see TV very strong still. We see this word of mouth, and family members very, very key coming through. And then we see social media coming through. And we saw that jump in social media coming through strongly last year. That has maintained that. If you look at this by segments and that, you'll see the empathizers over-index on family, friends, this community aspect, and indeed in terms of social media. So you can see what is sort of driving them and causing them maybe to waver, or how you can maybe change opinion as we move forward in that. So some traditional classic sources, but also I suppose newer sources, but the importance of getting in those sort of communities, and also in terms of that group of friends to really bed in and to change mindsets and that. This basically says sources for news and information generally. So TV is still very strong. Newspapers then, radio is still very strong, but dropping back a little bit. And we saw that jump in social media last year and moving up at that. Podcast, interesting, just slowly building over time and that. So it points to, I suppose, the importance of a multi-channel strategy overall on that. And then just coming towards the end, the most influential aspect in terms of bringing about social change. So what do you feel is most important in terms of bringing about social change? We see government policy continuing to lead the way overall, but also then current and news and current affairs programs, and which is not surprising. So those two very much top of the pile coming through in that. And we're seeing, again, a continued growth in terms of social media coming through as an influence on that overall on that, and one of the largest aspects that has jumped up this year. Just to talk a little bit about trust, so the level of trust attributed to, I suppose, multilateral agencies and people themselves and that. I suppose what we see over time is that all trust levels have decreased, or in the case, I suppose, of Irish government and overseas aid and that have remained relatively steady, albeit, I suppose, at a lower level of trust on that overall on that, And then the final one before I wrap up, the impact of institutions on reducing poverty in poorer countries. So what we see is that there's been a growth in recognition of the impact an individual can make this year. So we see that at the bottom of that. But I suppose what we see overall in United Nations and other international organizations, then I suppose business and other corporations, and then development organizations and charities would be the top three, in terms of that overall. But again, I suppose growth, I suppose, in terms of the influence of the person, and having an impact this year. So just look, 3 final points before I hand over to David, 3 takeouts. I suppose we have a breadth of data points, and you can delve into this to your heart's content. But I hope today we've showed you how we can delve a little bit deeper, understand, I suppose, audiences, allows us to obviously not only understand them, but track, I suppose, what people's views are over time. It allows us to, I suppose, test assumptions as well. And also it provides, I suppose, a blueprint to target, I suppose, new audiences that we mightn't have thought of, thinking about the segmentation of that, and to facilitate, I suppose, a deeper level of targeting for ourselves to make what we do more impactful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke. And I'd like to hand over now to David Hudson from the Development Engagement Lab. So as some of you may know, obviously Luke has presented on really the kind of longitudinal data research points. And I think it's hugely valuable to see the trends. And I think we can really start to see the trends now, way for what are the kind of pieces that are consistent year on year, and where we're seeing a divergence after a number of years as well. But also as part of the Worldview, we do look at, each year we look at delving deeper into some other topics. And this year we are looking specifically at climate and the SDGs. And that's where David and his work comes in. So I'll hand over to you, David, on that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Really good to be here. So I'm going to be focusing on the SDGs and climate change. And there's a full deck here. I'm not going to have time to go through each individual slide, so I will skip a few. So please forgive me for that. But you can go then and have a look at them in your own time. So just a little background on Development Engagement Lab, just to say that we've been running surveys similar to Worldview in the US, UK, France and Germany. but we've been partnering with DOCAS, supporting Worldview over the last few years. So yeah, really good to be here. This is all, feel free to cite it. It will be up on the portal and it will be in the packs for you. So do feel free to use it. So 3 main things before a few key insights here. First of all, around people's awareness of the SDGs and their understanding, their knowledge of them. A couple of questions around how they see different goals in terms of their importance and how achievable they think they're going to be. And then third, turn to climate change and questions around that. Okay, so first of all, awareness and knowledge. So here are the 4 questions that we ask our respondents. First of all, whether they've heard, read about the SDGs. Secondly, more of a knowledge question here. So which countries do the SDGs apply? So a little quiz for all of us in the room. Hopefully everyone knows the answer to these. How many SDGs are there? And when's the deadline? So the first plot here shows people's response to whether they say they've heard of them and whether they know what they are. So 12% of the Irish public are saying that they both know what they are and what their purpose is. So this is relatively low, but it's not uncommonly low. It's broadly in line with the other countries that we've surveyed in. On the latest data, it's certainly in line with France, Germany and Britain, and slightly lower than the US. It's also slightly lower than when a survey that the Irish government did a couple of years ago, I think it had it about 17%. So it has fallen a little bit since then. Perhaps not surprising either. It's getting the conversation around the SDGs has been pushed out by other things, right? The pandemic, Ukraine, etc. So there's plenty of room to work in to try and communicate better on the SDGs, to try and get across what this is to the public, and that absolutely should be the goal. But also, this is broadly in line with what we see elsewhere. So 56% of the Irish public say that they don't know what the SDGs are, never heard of them. Okay, so then we move on to the knowledge questions. So actually, no, I will look at this broadly. What we see here then, these are the same segments that Luke was showing us. The top 3 are the less engaged and the bottom 3 are the more engaged. The empathizers, which Luke flagged up as a particularly interesting segment, are there in yellow. And what you see here is that along the top row there, the less engaged audiences, 6 in 10 at least, are saying that they haven't heard of it, whereas that goes down on the bottom row a bit, and the highest we get is amongst the global citizens, where you've got a majority now saying yes, they've heard of them, if you add the 22 and 32 together there, even though the 32% said they're not familiar with their purpose. So again, you can see the segments are behaving in the way that we'd expect them to, and we would like them to. Okay, which countries do the SDGs apply to? So 18% chose the correct response option here, so around 2 in 10, which actually I don't think is too bad. I'm sure if people were to ask me about a policy goal that I wasn't an expert in, I might not know the answer either. But nevertheless, the most common response is don't know, around half of respondents. And you can see another 20% there saying more back into the MDGs frame of thinking about that it's all developing countries. Okay. I'm tempted to ask you the answers, but that's no. So number of global goals. So obviously the answer here is 17. So 12%, around 1 in 10 know this and have heard this. Again, 3/4 there saying they don't know. So this is not part of the everyday conversation. Should it be? Probably. Should we expect it to be? Maybe not, unless there's a lot stronger communication and campaign that goes on around this. And then finally, 2030 is the deadline. You can see here that 2 in 10, roughly 19% of the Irish public identify the 2030 SDG deadline. Okay, so what does this look like? Again, when we look across the segments, and what we've done here is we've totaled each individual's number of correct answers. And again, we see a similar pattern here with those along the top line, around 7 in 10 to 8 in 10 were unable to answer any of the questions correctly. And then even down amongst our more engaged segments here, still you're getting just around half of global citizens not knowing the answer to these three pretty much core questions about the SDGs. So one way of thinking about this is really kind of a policy wonk question that only kind of people who work in the sector would know the answer to these. But I would also suggest they're absolutely fundamental to the way that the SDGs are communicated, right? We have a deadline, it's 2030. 17 goals, maybe less so, but the idea that it applies to all countries as well, and the universality of this, these are surely things that we have to and would like to communicate to the public. So I think the report card here is can do better in general. Okay, we also modelled this a little bit, and men are more likely to say that they're aware. Draw your own conclusions from that, but also more likely to get correct answers. Younger people, more aware, more knowledgeable than older people. Again, that fits with our priors, I guess. More strong support within Dublin than outside Dublin. University degrees, higher formal education, positive correlation there. And with higher social grade, more awareness, but doesn't matter on knowledge. Religion measured as just a simple Catholic versus not Catholic doesn't make any difference here. Okay, right, important. Which goals are considered important? And which achievable? So we showed our respondents the 17 SDGs, and they had to pick up to 4 that they said thought were important. And then we also showed them all of the goals, and then they were asked to say whether they thought each individual goal was going to be achieved by 2030. Yes, it would be achieved, but not by 2030, or that it won't be achieved at all, or don't know. Okay. So the most important goal, the one that got put in the top 4 most consistently for 50% of respondents is to eradicate global poverty, SDG 1. Second place, which was a bit of a surprise for me, was the sustainable cities and communities. So that's obviously, there's a large proportion of the Irish public who feel like that's a really important goal to work towards. The other ones, reducing inequality, good health and well-being, and the WASH goal, which matches with lots of other research about that people are, the general public that is, believe in the importance of achieving human needs, basic human needs or human needs, first and foremost. They're the ones that cut through. Okay, this one you can look at in your own time. There's a better way of looking at this, which is to plot those 2 questions against one another, right? And we can see there's a really clear correlation here between those goals that people believe are achievable, but are considered less important, and those goals that are considered most important, like SDG 1, are the hardest to achieve. So again, there's a real comms challenge here, I would say, around convincing people that with the right efforts, the right policies, the right push, that they should have more optimism, I guess. Though, I mean, we should acknowledge that a lot of these goals, and most of these goals, are off target as well. So there's that. But you can, again, SDG 15. What's SDG 15? 16 is institutions. SDG 5 is gender equality. SDG 4, education. I'm just trying to get my own. SDG 15, life above land. There you go. Yes, came back to me. We can again plot these against the segments. Without going into this in detail, I think what you can see is that the less engaged segments, the dots are closer down here, so they believe they're less important and less achievable, and then the more engaged, they kind of go up, so more achievable but more important. But the relative places of them as you can see here, they tend to cluster. So there is differences, especially in the achievability of them. You can see the more engaged segments are higher on each goal, but actually the importance varies less than the achievability, which again, I think gives us a really important insight into what kind of comms are necessary to move people on SDGs. It's about possibility of progress and achievability, not so much their importance to people. Okay, we replicated another question from that was in the SDG national implementation, second national implementation report about why people do or don't engage with the SDGs. 4% of the Irish public say that they already engage in activities to promote the SDGs. There is 31% say they would be involved, but there are no initiatives that they know of in their local area. And 18% said they would, but they don't know how to find information on initiatives. So if we take people at their word, and we may want to, downgrade some of these numbers a little bit, but if we take people at their word, there is nearly 50% of respondents there saying that they would like to engage and somehow given the opportunity. So perhaps it gives us again an idea of where we want to both communicate and think about trying to communicate around the SDGs and what opportunities are available for people to get involved in if they so wish to. Okay, so that was the SDGs. I'm going to switch slightly to climate change now. And there's a number of questions here. We want to ask about what we think, or what the respondents think about the consequences of climate change, the impacts, who should take action to address climate change, and the actions that would have the biggest effect. Okay, so first of all, here are some of the consequences taken from expert reports on climate change, everything from loss of biodiversity to flooding parts of the world to become more uninhabitable. If we show these ranked order, then we see the top responses that people think that the consequences and the biggest impact of climate change for the global south will be is around food and water shortages. Just over 50% of respondents saying this. 49% saying more flooding, and then there's a slight drop off there around biodiversity, wildlife, and parts of the world become uninhabitable. All, I would say, pretty much environmental consequences, right? The more downstream consequences, certainly as people seem to be thinking about them, the risk of conflict, impact on health, economic effects, they're less front of mind for people, and yet may well be some of the biggest challenges that we have to face in the next 10 years or so. So again, it's good to know where people are at, what people are thinking about, but also what they are not thinking about. Again, segments, broadly, you can see there's a similar shape in those, but I will let you look at them at your own leisure. So here's a question that we've asked in other countries and asked in Ireland this last wave, asking where people feel like climate change is impacting, whether it's on people personally, their family, other citizens in Ireland, developing countries, or people in the global north in general, or future generations. And what we see here in a very consistent, and we've seen this across other countries as well, that actually people do not think that they will be personally affected, right? Now, that may be wrong, and people are assuming something wrongly there, but it also suggests that trying to communicate the importance of climate change by how it's going to affect you is not kind of the most, it's not the most receptive path to go down. People feel like the biggest consequences by far will be people in the global south and future generations. So it's far better to talk about the effects on people, distant strangers geographically, or those who are future generations, because that's where people think that the effects are going to be greatest, which makes sense. And again, segments, that's for you at your own leisure, but you see the expected patterns there where the disengaged audience doesn't see as strong impacts of climate change and the more engaged do, but the kind of the distribution of the effects across those different groups are broadly similar. Okay, so here's a question. Who's responsible for taking action on climate change? Governments, you yourself, or other citizens in Ireland? And some pretty striking results here. So 40% say the most important responsible actor is the government. 43% say it's my fellow citizens, other people in Ireland, and only 17% say me personally, right? So I think there's a really clear message there that people want the government to act on this, but they also want society as a whole to act on this. People don't want to be told that it's their own personal responsibility, right? No one likes to have their finger wagged at them, but if there's a sense that everybody makes changes, then people are going to be much more receptive to that, I think. When we look at the segments, just want to flag up one thing here because it stands out. Almost identical across the segments, uncannily so, apart from the pragmatists. The pragmatists are especially determined that they don't have personal responsibility and that actually it's other people in Ireland. So again, thinking about very carefully about who you're talking to, what their own values are, how they perceive the world, and what kind of messages we use to communicate on climate change, etc. This final question, I think, the most effective global actions to reduce the negative effects of climate change. Again, a whole series that we drew here from doing a review of various expert reports, everything from changing global food systems down to halting deforestation and restoring nature there. So what comes out top here? So two, actually, two clearly on 51%, so just a majority there. Reducing consumption, reuse, repair, recycling, but also halting deforestation and restoring nature also gets 51%. And actually more people chose that one as their first choice, but overall, in terms of the top ranked three, the reduce, reuse, repair, recycling comes top. Other things such as banning the use of fossil fuels comes down much lower. Taxing or limiting air travel wasn't particularly popular. Tighter emission standards for vehicles was just as unpopular. When we look at that across the segments, there you see support for some of those tougher actions, such as banning the use of fossil fuels amongst the more engaged segments. So again, if we are thinking about identifying those that are, as I think Luke said, wavering or soft support, the empathizers, then you can see there that the reduced consumption, reuse, repair and recycling is the kind of actions that they are particularly receptive to. Okay, I've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to whistle through these insights. So 12% respondents say they've heard and know what the SDGs are. Understanding's relatively low, in fact, really quite low. The SDGs just aren't part of the public conversation at the moment. And if we want to change that, then a concerted and consistent and very tight messaging campaign and aligned with support for global citizenship, education, etc., needs to be the priority. There is, according to people's own self-reported attitudes, some appetite for engaging with activities, even though they say they don't know how or where. So providing people with opportunities to do so is important. Very clear that the Irish public thinks that water shortages is the biggest negative consequence, and the things such as migration at the moment are much lower in terms of the public consciousness. People feel like climate change is not it's not going to affect them personally, but will affect people in the global south and living in future generations. In terms of effective solutions, as we said, just shown, deforestation and restoring nature, but also this idea of reducing consumption and everything that goes with it, especially amongst those empathizers. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. And after the final bit, we look forward to questions.
Great. Anda, so I'd like you to join us now, if you can, for your contribution. Hopefully you'll come up here. Great. I'd like just to, again, just to mention that Anda is the Deputy Director for Public Opinion Research and Consultation in Global Affairs Canada. They've been running their own version of Worldview for the past number of years. And I suppose this really is to share some insights about what's going on in some other countries and perhaps what we can learn or take from or be inspired by as we go forward. So thanks very much, Anda. I'll hand over to you now.
Lovely. So sorry, I'm sharing screen here and I have a few notes. So again, thank you for inviting us to share our knowledge and experience. We also want to thank Jennifer Hudson and David Hudson, who have been working with us in the past, and we have had this a couple of versions of this project, and we have used the results throughout Global Affairs. As you said, Deputy Director, Global Affairs Canada, and let's get right in. I'll talk a little bit about international assistance, as this is a component of Canada's foreign policy. The work with Canada does, but the work that Canada does to support developing countries can seem very disconnected from the everyday lives of Canadians at home. So to effectively bridge the gap between Canadians' experiences and issues happening thousands of kilometers away, Global Affairs Canada requires a solid understanding of how the Canadian public views international assistance and global issues. On the other hand, this enables us to make evidence-based decisions about how to frame communication messages, announcements, programs, and policies, at the same time disseminating the information widely to various networks and NGOs. We're a small team. We work in the public opinion research and the communications branch of Global Affairs. As feedback gathered from Canadians is considered a way of Canadians to communicate with the government. Same as you, we're research brokers between our clients and our suppliers, providing research advice while keeping in mind the government context. For example, we would have to provide an inclusive environment where Canadians can express their opinions and can access public reports. So our department is divided in 4 portfolios: international development, foreign affairs, trade, and consular assistance. And today I'll be only focusing on international development. We have research contracts, but we also do internal research with clients, smaller scale studies, and we also do employee surveys. We review secondary analysis from reputable sources and industry associations such as SMR, Wayport, Pew Research Center, and our own Canadian Research Insights Council. We also have a clear definition of what public opinion research is. Sometimes we have the challenge to clarify the difference between a focus group and a consultation to various clients. Just let me go through a few results that we have from our last study. So Canadians see the world as interconnected. 3/4 say they have a duty to ensure that their actions do not harm people living in other countries. I put some other statistics in here. I'll let you read those at your leisure. Also, Canadians want aid to reduce poverty rather to serve national interests. And similar to Ireland, the top 3 spending priorities are clean water, education, and health. We see here that we asked a similar question: how much a difference, if any, do you think each of the following can make to reduce poverty in poor countries? We saw you had a similar question in your research. Canadians feel that many of these organizations can make a difference in reducing world poverty, but are less confident in the government of Canada's capacity, as well as their own ability to make an impact. So that on that one, we are the same when it comes to self. So this highlights the potential to work with our partners to share messages about effectiveness of international assistance, and why it should matter to Canadians. We see here that 40 Canadians trust development organizations, while the same don't. So there is an opportunity to build on this trust profile and reputation. In terms of SDGs, 18% of Canadians say that they heard of SDGs compared to 12 in Ireland. 33% heard of SDGs but don't know what they are, compared to 26 in Ireland. So engagement with global poverty trends are similar between Canada and Ireland. And they're when it comes to reading, watching, or listening to news in the past, discussing with family or friends, or engaging with a development organization. However, we see that Ireland is more generous, and there's a higher percentage of people donating than in Canada. As we've heard before, the disengaged, and this is something really interesting. Basically, we target these disengaged. We call them neutrals, and we kind of have the view that if those who have positive views will fantastic. Those with negative views are very difficult to convert. And we have focused on this neutral audience and have tried to target messages towards this audience. I will start speaking right now a little bit about the work we do with suppliers and our contracted studies. The clients are various geographic desks within global affairs, as well as the communication branch itself. The contracting process is a bit involved. We have to start the contracting process early and be on top of the files. The research is often included in memoranda to cabinet as part of the public environment assessment. So ministers bring forward these documents when they wish to advance a new policy. For example, we use them for the speech from the throne and the budget and the Prime Minister's request. Along the same lines, the President of Treasury Board tables a yearly departmental plan in the House of Commons for considerations by Parliament. I added the link to this document in the presentation. So in this report, we have indicators that are derived from conducting public opinion research. For example, we asked questions on rating the government's performance on elements of Canadian foreign policy, such as speaking up in support of human rights and promoting gender equality. Here within Global Affairs, we have our client International Development Partnership and Operations branch. And in working with them, we identified gaps in these surveys to shed a spotlight on the need to refine the work in sharing and explaining results on international assistance to Canadians. Findings related to public engagement were discussed to seek partner reaction and encourage them to incorporate these learnings as part of their initiatives. So, for example, we found that 3 in 4 say that they enjoy visiting other countries and learning about other cultures, and about the same proportion feel that they have a duty to ensure that their actions do not harm people living in other countries. So what we did with this, we suggested that we provide more exposure on social media of our volunteer cooperation programs, and these are designed to provide opportunities for skilled Canadians to participate in international development assistance efforts. We also found that Canadians expressed support for international assistance, but they were less certain about the Government of Canada's role. Just 26% saying that government spending on international aid is effective. They feel that this international aid ends up in the pockets of corrupt politicians in the developing world, and most international aid does not get to the intended recipients. So what we did with this information, we developed communication to better explain programming results to Canadians, including efforts in anti-corruption. As I quoted earlier, clean water, education and access to healthcare were very important, and we keep showcasing results on projects related to these priority areas. So our clients, they share the results with this with the intra-council network. They hold a distinctive leadership role in engaging Canada's international cooperation sector through information exchanges, and through this vast network of Canadian organizations, as well as dialogue on priority issues to support Canada's Canada's feminist international assistance policy and SDGs. The data was also shared with Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health, CanWatch. They are composed of more than 100 NGOs, academic institutions, health professionals associations, and they're all focused on health outcomes for women and children in more than 1,000 communities worldwide. Our contracted study ended up at Library and Archives Canada. Publicly, this is a dedicated public opinion research collection for all government departments, following rigorous reporting standards set by the government. Media is very well aware of this collection, and if there are sensitive reports, they always make follow-up inquiries. So we have to be prepared. We're working with colleges and universities to develop a pilot project where we make available all our data sets for students to conduct further analysis as part of their studies. So in conclusion, research helps us make evidence-based decisions. Canadians benefit from learning more about international development and global issues. Academics and NGOs will be able to apply this information to their own research and communication planning. And in the year ahead, we look forward to providing research support on key areas identified in our departmental plan. Some of those are rules-based international system, advanced democratic principles, human rights, gender equality, promoting biodiversity, climate action, just to name a few. So hopefully, I will stop here, and I will. I know this is a very brief and short, and hopefully I've stimulated some curiosity, and hopefully I'm here for questions. So thank you so much.
And for that, I think it's really it's been brilliant to actually get a completely different perspective, obviously not only from Canada, but the fact that obviously this work is central to the government's kind of overseas development policy and engagement with citizens as well, and kind of gives a different perspective of how the data can be utilised. I'd like now to invite our panel up, if that's okay. So Luke, David, and of course Barry, if you'd like to join us here at the front, and I might. Great, thank you. But I'm delighted to have obviously 4 key experts here for the panel discussion. So firstly, David, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. We see from the latest data that the Irish support for ODA is very high and broad, but not necessarily deep. And we also see low levels from the SDGs and this not me, not now attitude from the climate perspective. So from your perspective, how do we go about addressing some of these issues, like reaching new audiences and increasing knowledge and awareness. Can you share some of the initiatives that you've seen in other countries, perhaps, that you think have been able to get a little bit more traction with different audiences?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So first thing, I think that from what I know you're already doing incredibly well here in Ireland is through schools and curriculum and trying to do development education. So that's going to be a whole generation that have gone through with the kind of their sense of their place in a global world. Then I think thinking about the more challenging aspect of that in terms of who are these people who are relatively less engaged, not the disengaged, but those that are kind of empathizers or on the fence. I think there's a couple of things I would say. One is, and this should be common sense, but like no one else thinks about this, right? We are a very weird group of people in this room, and most people are worried about other things. Everything from their bin collection, house prices, potholes in the roads, etc. Maybe they are worried about conflict. Maybe they are worried about immigration, but they don't ever think about it through the lens of development assistance, cooperation, aid, etc. So I think the challenge there is to talk about issues that people are concerned about and do it in a way that helps them see that there are things that can be done, that the government can do, that charities, NGOs, the development sector can do and is doing. And I think another thing, and again, this is all to praise what you're doing as a sector here in Ireland already, is go to the places where people are at. And I won't say anything more about it, but I think if you could talk more about the ploughing stuff that you did, I think that's really good. And having conversations with people in the street where they're at, and trying to talk them around, because I don't think people are implacably opposed to this, not in an ideological, vehement way. They have other priorities, or they have a few kind of slightly casual assumptions about the way that the world works that can be easily overturned if you have a kind of empathetic conversation with them and let them feel like they're heard.
Great, thanks. I might come to you next, Barry. You've written a very relevant and timely piece in the Policy and Practice Journal entitled "The Far Right and Overseas Development Aid: Narratives, Policies and Impact." I think that what we're seeing today in terms of perhaps kind of a new even party here in Ireland actually having ODA as one of its target areas is a change that we haven't seen before. And I think it would be great if you could talk about the importance of counter strategies rooted in the interconnectedness between local and global issues, and if you could speak on more of that and perhaps global citizenship education and the importance of that.
Right, okay. No pressure, hey?
No.
It was really interesting listening to what people were presenting there. And I suppose I got like 3 points that I wanted to emphasize about counter strategies, And I think one of the first things we need to do is to learn from the far right. I think the strategies of the far right are really interesting in the way that they manage to link the local with the global. That might sound sort of contradictory, because when you think of the far right, you think of like nativism, you think of nationalism and so on and so forth. But they're globally connected, and there are global networks which counteract the global networks on international development, for example. And so I think it's important to look at that in the way that they look at culture, the culture wars basically, and how they use those. So I think that's the first thing, that link between the local and the global and how they use that. I mean, you can look at, for example, narratives which are shared by the far right across the world, but they arrive into our social media accounts in a very personal way. So that's one way to think about it, So I think that's one of the first things to look at. Another one is, and sort of saying what David, isn't it? Yeah, it's about universalizing the message. And so again, it's linking the local, the national with the global, and showing how we all face similar problems, and not just the problems that we as a sector want to concentrate on, but to actually go and ask people what their problems are. You know, I think a lot of very valuable stuff came out of the latest wave on that. I was very shocked to see, for example, that something like 40% of people were worried about economic crisis in Ireland, when you consider that, you know, our per capita GDP is in six figures. So, like, what's happening there, you know? So I think it's important to go and ask people what it is, what their problems are, and then to try to universalize the message that these are problems that everybody is facing. Yeah. And finally, I would say about targeting the disengaged and the waverers. Now, Anna there talked just about the waverers, but I think it's very dangerous to leave the disengaged aside. We can only look at the way that only like a year ago, and this came out in the data as well, about immigration, it went from a theme that nobody was talking about and nobody was concerned about, to now almost 30% of people are concerned about, and everybody is talking about it. So things can change really fast, and it is the disengaged which are being targeted by the far right. So I think it's very important to go to those communities and talk to those communities and design programs based on what those communities think would reach them, rather than us deciding to communicate to them. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks very much. It's really interesting insights, Barry, I think, from your perspective, and even just seeing kind of what's happening, the kind of shift at the global level, and actually how we can kind of see that emanating here in Ireland. Luke, I might come to you next, just with regards to, I suppose, we have a bumper year of elections ahead this year, not only here in Ireland, but obviously many internationally as well. You know, in terms of segmenting the different audiences, I'd like to ask your opinion about the value of this work and how it's not just a kind of a nice to have, but how we can actually, what makes this type of research so valuable, and how we can really utilize it in this quite year ahead, which is very much, these issues will be kind of hotly debated and discussed at a political level.
Yeah, okay. I suppose, yeah, it is a year of elections. I think there's something like 60 countries go to the polls this year. We'll have obviously a few elections this year, and we'll see how many there will be. And I suppose it's about understanding people. I suppose, to echo what the guys are saying, it's about understanding, I suppose, why people have certain views, yeah? And we might not agree with some of the views that are in other countries or emanating here, but we really have to just don't stick our head in the sand and actually understand why people hold these views, yeah? Because there are people that are on the fence. There are people, we have a segment there, and a lot of companies do segmentation. And the reason they do that is they want to understand the mindset of people with a view to either influence them, changing their views, changing their behaviors, yeah? And we have the data here, and it's about understanding, I suppose, what those sort of views are. Why do people have those views? And it's not just even taking the quantitative figures, yeah? The quantitative gives us a frame, it gives us a size, a prize, it gives us who they are. You can go deeper and you can look at region, and you can look outside Dublin where the empathizers come from, and that. But using qualitative research to actually understand and unlock what is happening, yeah? And that's what people, politicians use it, companies and brands use it to have messages that appeal, that can resonate, and even to debunk myths, because a lot of what we see online these days and what people are seeing, they just don't understand, and everything looks sort of real to people, and very often just misconceptions. And we've seen that when we look at the empathizer group, for example, whereby their views can be changed, and they've actually held things with, oh geez, I didn't know that was the case at all. It actually is completely different, and they can be swayed, and then they in turn, using their networks, their social networks, convince others and that, So it is really about this type of research is vital to understand and to unlock, I suppose, effective communications, yeah, to help, I suppose, drive change in society. Mm. And if you actually overlaid political views and populism on our segments, you can almost start to picture where, I suppose, more populist views would flow in those segmentations.
Great, thanks. And I might come to you, Anda, before I open up the floor to questions. I was wondering if you could just, obviously we're a much smaller country here in Ireland than in Canada, but you do a bit of work on geographically disaggregating the data. So would you be able to speak to how that kind of informs and guides activities and engagement at that level?
Yes, so we do a lot of geographic segmentation. We partner with all with folks with councils and NGOs around the country to deliver this information. And we just about a day ago we were asked to take this research and actually do an analysis for Atlantic Canada. I'm just looking here. So what did we have? We had this meeting. I just want to get the name correctly. They wanted all this information exactly by province, right? Because it was interesting to them. We also have the additional French and English is also another situation that we have to work with. The Atlantic Council for International Cooperation. So this part of the ICN, the Inter-Council Network. So the Inter-Council Network is the main the main organization, but it's formed of all these geographical partnerships. And the latest was the Atlantic Council International Cooperation. Within this, there were 27 organizations in Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So the research that we have, it's definitely it comes to those folks in based on their own citizens and giving them a perspective on regional differences.
Great, thanks very much for that. A kind of very interesting approach, kind of when we start to go down, particularly when we link it to, I suppose, an election year. Now, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions, perhaps, and we would like just to invite people to speak into the roving mic, if possible. You guys should be able to be picked up on this. Yeah. Any questions from the floor? Yeah. If you'd like just to introduce yourself as well, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. So I'm Anya and I'm from the Irish Development Education Association. So I just had a question, and I apologize in advance because it just might be a lack of knowledge in terms of surveying and public engagement, but I'm particularly curious about the segmentation. And please do interrupt me if I was wrong. I was trying to take notes at the same time, but so you mentioned that you interviewed 2,500 people. Is it for this wave 4? And so I noticed the numbers as well for the previous wave, so I'm not sure if that's the same people or different people, but even if we look at just one wave, that's 2,500. In total, that's approximately 10,000 if they're different people. But in a population of 5 million, I was just wondering how, is it a recognized methodology that such percentage can represent the view of an Irish public? And especially in terms of segmentation, it does seem very, especially for the two opposites, really rough boxes to be put on. And I suppose in our sector, these are things we're always extremely careful with because we close ourselves to a lot of opportunities, especially when it comes to such complex issues as we were looking here. We've worked with people who are against migrants, but if you look into it, they're much more welcoming to Ukrainian refugees than they are to Palestinians. So it's very different questions. Or when you talk about poverty, there's a very different understanding of poverty. And if you dig deeper, I'm just, very curious about those segmentations and how in this situation, they apply, I suppose, to ODA. And again, ODA is just so wide. So did you do that based on ODA or based on questions? Do they vary based on the issues that you're exploring? Sorry, I'm going to stop before I...
So just a pot of version. So we interview over 2,500. We interview over 2,500 per wave. It's a longitudinal study. So we do go back, and we interview. We have to obviously boost each wave of that, but pretty much a longitudinal study. That's very robust, you know, so 2,500, you know, margin of error is very extremely small on that. So it has a very large, one of the largest studies that is done, and it gives a very robust sort of segmentation, and it's a very solid segmentation in terms of its testing and its tracking over time and that. How we actually develop the segmentation through various statistical analyses, k-means, cluster, and so forth, and we use an iterative process, putting in, I suppose, various questions that see which gives us the most robust model in terms of the segmentation. And I suppose the questions that we have in there gives the most robust model, you know, and it's a very large question set that we use to do that. You're quite right, I suppose, just on the last piece of your question. You know, in terms of when you're looking at, I suppose, attitudes to different populations, there are differences, and we actually did, I think last year, David might actually tell us a little bit about that. We actually we had attitudes to people, immigrants from different countries and areas, yeah, and it did differ quite substantially in terms of how people's perceptions were, and that. I suppose what we're tracking is at an overall level. I think still it's important to do that, but you're quite right, when you delve deeper in that, not everybody is equally, you know, viewed on that, you know. David, do you remember the result?
Yeah, I can't give you the exact number because it was over a year ago, but basically the further away the country was from Ireland that the refugees were coming from, the less, slightly less welcoming the Irish public was. But in general, it was generally a positive view, but it did vary depending on which country. We asked about Myanmar, we asked about Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine. We didn't ask about Gaza or Palestine at that point. I'm trying to remember where else, Venezuela maybe. So there is some differences there. It does matter, but I'm very happy to try and dig it out and share it, or it should be on the portal.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say, things have moved on a little bit, you know, just in up to the last 18 months as well. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we have another question over here.
Hi, Carol Wickham from Plan International. David, more out of curiosity than anything else, you were sharing about how people think climate change is going to affect them, and on a personal level, no, family and friends, no, and then obviously a big increase when it came to global south, but also global north. I think 32% that they affected them. And for me, global north and global south probably aren't colloquial terms, they're very sector terms to use. And I'm just wondering, was a definition shared with people that they understood the difference between global north and global south? And also the fact that they didn't feel it was going to affect them personally, but 32% felt it was going to affect the global north as a whole, just seems to talk against each other. And if you have any insight to that.
The short answer is no, and I'll have to go back and have a look. I don't believe we defined those terms. Again, I can check. What we do right at the beginning of the survey, I think, is introduce the kind of the general issues, and people have responded to lots and lots of questions before they got through to those at the end. So I would imagine most respondents were pretty sensitized to what we were talking about. But in terms of the question about global north and versus family and friends, I'd have to have a look at it a bit more and perhaps have a chat afterwards about it. Yeah.
There's a disconnect somewhere in understanding.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if this would be covered in the research or in your own work. Is there any sense on an increase in just general anti-NGO sentiment, the alt-right side of things, or the disengaged? Yeah,
Well, I'll go first. I'd just say that I've seen some evidence in terms of an anti-elite attitude. And if there's going to be an anti-elite attitude, then therefore that will include NGOs in all probability. So I'd say if you see any evidence of that at all, then that could mean that people will mistrust NGOs more. But there was a few other elements that I picked out as well that I can't remember that really show that there is certainly a growing anti-elite attitude.
Yeah, Yeah, we didn't answer NGOs in particular, but if you look at that disengaged, they probably got a little bit more disengaged, if you know what I mean. So it's sort of strengthened over the last 2 years, and they, I suppose the interesting thing, they've grown as a proportion as well, so in society and that.
Oh, right.
Thanks very much. Absolutely fascinating presentations and so much to chew over. I think a few of the panelists mentioned the idea of reaching out to the waverers and those groups who could be convinced, and I think that makes a lot of sense when thinking of the findings of the survey and I suppose the attitudes at population level. But just thinking, sorry, I'm Gary from Trócaire, and my team work on campaigning and activism. And I'm just thinking, like, does it make sense in building activism to try and reach out to the messaging, those waverer groups, and the values that they associate with, or does it make sense to lean into the more highly engaged groups because they are engaged and they're more likely to take action? And so should we focus on, particularly on the deeper activism, on engaging with those groups and their interests? Or are we missing something if we don't reach out to the waivers? I don't know if there's any attitudes from the panelists on that. Thanks.
I'm happy to have a go. Yeah. I think it's a really, really good question. I think there's a couple of things spring to mind. I think with those people who are not engaged or less engaged, when it comes to activism, I'm not sure you're asking them to do anything. I'm not sure that's the right thing, except for perhaps their permission, right? So maybe one strategy is for those who are campaigning is to reassure, to explain, to allow people to say, okay, well, I'm not going to go and volunteer for this. I'm not necessarily going to sign a petition, but equally, I'm not going to go out and campaign against this and use my voice in a very negative way. I think that's the way I think about it. But that said, and this comes back, I think, to Anya's point, within these segments, you've got huge variety as well. And so there will be people who say, perhaps through their local church or something, they would get involved in some way, but not in a way that they would think about as supporting ODA, right? It's just like through helping perhaps their fellow right? So I think there might be opportunities there, but in general, I would think it's more about just reassurance and seeking permission to go and spend money and spend it well, supporting communities in partnership, reassuring that there's not excessive loss to waste and corruption and those kinds of things.
Yes, go ahead, Barry. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you want to achieve as well, and probably it's not just Trócaire's role, it's also the whole sector. But if you want to keep public support, then I think it is important to go out and reach out to those disengaged groups. And I think one of the things that came out also is the class division within that, where those who are most disengaged are more working class. So I think it's important to think about that, sort of give a class analysis to it. But as I said earlier on, things can change very rapidly. And also there's the whole phenomenon of mainstreaming, which people talk about, whereby the far right brings out these talking points about immigration and so on, but really they're tapping into prejudices and ideas that are quite prevalent within mainstream parties as well. So, you may find within mainstream parties that there is a lot of resistance to ODA actually, and the far right coming out against it, and also stirring up that anti-ODA sentiment within working class and grassroots groups can then make the mainstream parties react against it, especially those who weren't really very convinced about ODA in the first place. So I think it's very important to attend to those disengaged groups and to do it from the bottom up. And by that, what I mean is going and talking to them about their issues and their problems and how they relate that to wider global issues, which is more the sort of areas of concern of organizations like Trócaire and so on.
The only thing I'd add to that is, the size of prize as well. Obviously, it's very important, obviously, for donors for the top part, the top segments, because they are important, in terms of delivering. Yeah. But the size of some of those segments, like it's over 1 million people, so it's go back to this mainstreaming part. You can't I don't think you can ignore. You can't, and they're growing as well. That's the worrying thing.
Great.
I could,
Oh, sure. And thanks.
If I could add to that, yes, these folks, we call them the neutrals, right? So I guess on our 10-point scale, we kind of look what's in the middle, or we look for those who do not have opinions and strong opinions. So then we look across the country, we profile them, and we see what type of messages we can send those folks. And it's true that you can't get them to act right away, but at least there is awareness. There is we can draw them closer to a positive, slower, and would hope that the impact could be seen over years. And we do our concerns here at home, same as everywhere, but in Canada we're looking at affordable housing, cost of living, healthcare, economy, unemployment. But Canadians here are also looking at the environment, climate change, and immigration and refugees. And I kind of set those in the order that Canadians, in order of percentages. And we look forward to seeing what's happening with these neutral folks and how we can tailor messages to them. So it's been one of our strategies for a while. So I thought I'd add this. Thanks.
Thanks. And I know I think even this year we'll probably be doing a lot of work on, as part of the Worldview project, looking at this empathizer group, kind of delving into them more, I suppose, specifically. As you said, it's not a small group of people, but ones that we know have the potential to kind of shift their attitudes as well. But what I'd like to ask you, Barry, is just on, I suppose it's around that, because there's a slight difference of opinion, because I think when we look at the disengaged, for example, and having worked in the sector for a long time as well, there's an understanding, there's a group of people who you probably will never get on board. So you don't necessarily, drain all your resources trying to do that. But perhaps you could, I suppose, give us an insight into kind of, I suppose the risk or the threat of not engaging at this stage, particularly as we're seeing a bit of a shift nationally here in Ireland, or a little bit more, I suppose, activity at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the risk is quite significant. Again, going back to the issue of immigration, we've seen that the issue of immigration has gone from, as I said, nobody was talking about it to almost everybody's talking about it now, and it's become a great issue of national concern. But it also can be linked to ODA, So, for example, just to give you an example, if you look at Trump and the Republicans now in the United States, they have linked aid to Ukraine, which is not quite ODA, but nonetheless it is foreign policy, to border control and keeping immigrants out. If you look at the UK, for example, their Rwanda plan is, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think that's being paid out of, by ODA, or at least some ODA funds will go towards that. So there is, as pressure against immigration grows, that can feed into pressure against ODA. So I think it's very important to be aware of that and not leave that the sector, which is most vulnerable to that discourse, to leave it unattended. How you do that, I'm not really sure.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So any other questions from the floor? That's fine. No, we know it all now at this stage. No, I'm joking. But I think I'd like just to also get your take on that, David, then, kind of the risk of doing nothing, like we've seen kind of the UK dip significantly over the last number of years. And we're seeing that trend now continue in other European countries. So really just if you can speak to a little bit around that, I suppose that counter narrative and seeing what we can do.
Gosh, so I'm just trying to think. I think I agree 100% with the risk of not addressing this issue. Immigration is what we're talking about here and now. I suppose my only question would be, which group are you talking to? Because now immigration, it's coming out of the kind of the far right, right? And then it's going mainstream. I'm not sure you try and talk to the far right about it, but you're trying to talk to the people who the far right are. It's resonating with, as you said, right? It taps into people's, well, you can call them prejudices or you can call them concerns. And I think that's the other thing that we have to do, is understand that some concerns are totally valid, right? And it's totally valid to be worried about questions of housing, house prices, questions of cost of living, etc. And so I think trying to put those into some kind of broader public debate and conversation. You pointed at the GDP per capita figures, right? So there's definitely a disconnect between how people are feeling and experiencing everyday life, and perhaps also other ways of framing it and thinking about it. And there's a really strong tradition of hospitality, welcoming, multiculturalism within Ireland, and people are proud of that, and rightly so. And so I think trying to enter into the conversation with the aim of winning it is exactly the right thing to do. I think the Rwanda boats, the small boats and Rwanda policy in the UK is an absolute own goal for the government. I don't think, I know what they're trying to do, and it fits into the larger political and communication strategy, but on its own terms, it's failing because people don't like it. They see it being cruel. They do want something to happen about what they perceive as a crisis of migration, but it's seen as very gimmicky. It's not working, and it's very obscure and incredibly expensive. Yeah, and it's not going to work. No one's going to, the courts are going to stop it. Most people get this, but they still want something done about immigration. So, trying to pick the right ground to have that debate on is really, really important, and to try and get on the front foot, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Barry.
Sorry, don't want to be hogging the mic. But we did some research. It was very cheap research, but we did some research on why people were attending demonstrations against asylum seekers here, against the establishment of asylum seeker accommodation. And it was really, I noticed like a lot of the things that you said about what people's concerns were exactly what people were saying. They were worried about a lack of housing. They were worried about not having access to welfare. They were worried about security, about crime. And they were worried about resource stretching, and they're all really valid complaints. And there was even some quotes which I thought was really funny. There was one woman said that she felt it was really unfair, and these were all working class communities. She thought it was really unfair that her daughter couldn't get the dole unemployment, whereas Ukrainians could, or whereas refugees could. And I thought, well, she must be wrong about that, but in actual fact she was right. Like, Ukrainians did get the dole straight away, no questions asked, when they came over, whereas her daughter, if she didn't have enough stamps, she would have to be means tested. So there's truth there. It's not just, and we have to be aware of what's happening in those communities and those worries.
Great. I'd like to now invite Owen up from Irish Aid, please. So, as many of you know, obviously Irish Aid has been supporting this project and funding this project for the last number of years, and it's been invaluable, I think, to the sector. I think what we saw today, but it'd be great to hear your perspective on it as well. Thanks very much, Owen.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks to Laura and all the Oaks team for all the work put it into today, and to David, Luke, and Barry for some really, really insightful and really fascinating discussions. There's so much to take from it. We've already had so many insightful discussions that I'm not going to delay proceedings by repeating anything that's been said, but just to give a couple of very high-level sort of reactions, I suppose, to what has been said. First of all, Worldview is a really useful snapshot of Irish society. It's a kind of a warts and all snapshot in a lot of ways. There's a lot of very positive things in there. Some not so positive, some maybe a bit surprising as well. Like on the positive side, 3/4 of people believe in ODA, are concerned about issues in the developing world, and think that ODA should either be increased or stay the same. So they're really positive results. And I know from speaking to counterparts across the EU, there's a degree of envy around our results in those questions as well. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. Some of the the results that we spoke about are, maybe a bit surprising. The climate findings, it seems to illustrate that, climate is still a problem for someone else, somewhere else, and at some other time, which is a bit surprising. 17% saying it's a personal responsibility. I thought maybe we'd moved slightly further than that. There is other research. The EPA do a lot of research on climate as well, and it would be interesting to look at those results sort of side by side. When we're talking about 51% saying reusing and recycling are being the most impactful measures against climate change, I was reminded of another session I was at recently about a similar topic, and somebody was talking about the recycling fog, which is this idea that, people, obviously recycling is very important, but there's this sense that, well, I recycle, so I don't have to do anything else, that it's nearly become a negative in terms of action. And that would seem to be illustrated by those results as well. Likewise, the SDG ones, we're not outliers by the sounds of things in terms of the international findings, but I suppose given that we are at the halfway point of the SDGs, it's certainly a bit of a pause for thought in terms of where we are in terms of communicating those and how we go about that. So really interesting there. There's a massive amount of data here, and it really does take time to digest it all. It's almost hard to know where to begin sort of looking at the results in a lot of ways. The challenge for, I think, communications around this is really how we use these results in our work and in our strategies and in our plans going forward. And I think, the segments, I think, are the real value in all of this. A communications strategy obviously is about knowing who you're talking to, what you need to say to them, where they are, and Worldview tells us exactly that. So, the challenge for us, I think, as communications professionals, or marketing professionals, or fundraising professionals even, is to know how to actually use that in our plans going forward. I rightly or wrongly, I kind of look at the 6 segments in sort of 3 categories: the supporters, the middle ground, and the opponents. And that middle ground is getting bigger, which you could look as a positive, or else you could worry that maybe people are beginning to slide down the ladder a little bit. But it's a very, very large group of people, and that, I think, is where we're looking at in Irish Aid in terms of how to look at that sort of movable middle, and how we try and either move them back up or certainly sort of address the slide anyway. And I think that's what we all really need to be doing. And as I said, the challenge is really how to make what is a very complex, large data set, how to really make that sort of live and breathe in our communication strategies. And there are challenges there for us, I think, but we're more than capable, I think, collectively of rising to that. When you look at the overall results of public sentiment, maybe given that we've 2 ministers from a certain party, maybe a lot done, a lot more to do might be the reflection on it. But there's definitely we look forward to working with Docus and you all indeed about how we do that in the months ahead. So thank you very much again to everyone for coming, and for all the panelists and all the really insightful contributions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Owen. And I think we had a good session this morning with members of the Worldview steering group, just looking at really the practical application of this in the next 6 months, 9 months, year, and what the next iteration could look like as well. And I was just, as we wrap up, perhaps Barry, you could say, sorry, not Barry, I'm looking at the lens here. David, perhaps you could say a couple of words just regarding the imagery work that we are intending to carry out this year, which would essentially replace the kind of segment on the SDGs and climate and what that could look like.
Yeah, so one of the constant conversations is about the way that partnerships, the developing world, the global south, people who live there are represented through imagery, right? And the way that we do that and what the consequences of that is or are in terms of whether people are seen as possessing agency, whether they're seen as worthy recipients, whether that makes people turns them off and feels like, oh, well, you're showing me the same negative images as I've seen for the past 30 years. Why should I do anything about this? Like the last time I gave money, nothing's changed, right? Or do we show very positive images and then people are, well, everything looks okay, right? So there's real challenges there about getting the imagery right for ethical reasons and reasons of respect, but also in terms of what are we trying to communicate and what ask are we trying to get across. So lots of organizations have lots of images, and what we're proposing to do is to request organizations that want to be part of this research to offer up some of their imagery that they use in appeals or communications without logos on it. So everything would be debranded, and then those images will be put into a collection where we're going to design a series of experiments around those images to see how people respond to them emotionally, but also maybe indications of planned behavior and stuff. We've already done this in the UK and Germany with NGOs and charities, and so we're very happy to share those results and like a bit more information. We will be in touch through DOCAS, right, in the next few weeks, I guess, with some more information. Is that everything?
Yep. No, that's great. That's perfect. And I think it's just to say, obviously, you know, there's a wealth of data. There's lots of activities that are happening. We know a lot of the organizations that are already engaged that work with us on this, but we are also very open to all of our members, you know, getting more involved, seeing how they can apply or we can support them to apply this research, this evidence to their work as well. And it's just to mention, we have, thanks to Concern, we have recorded this session, and we will be sharing the link for this as well. So please do share this with your colleagues who couldn't be here today. There is a lot to digest, but I hope that today we have at least kind of unpacked a little bit of it, what it means for us, perhaps the way we can go forward, and how this can really inform our public engagement, communications, advocacy, policy as a sector, because I think it will be a challenging year ahead, but I think the high level of support for ODA, I think, is a key motivator, to be honest. There is a lot of support that's out there, and I think it's really about how we can communicate more effectively, how we can engage some audiences that are a little bit more disconnected than others. But thanks very much, and it's great to have you all here today. Thanks.